She's finally where she belongs, my daughter-in-law murmured, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she closed the lid of the empty urn. My son, Michael, stood beside her, his head bowed, not in grief, but to hide the triumph in his eyes. They had just celebrated my life in a lavish memorial service, funded by the fortune they had stolen. But as the last of the guests drifted away from my own mansion, I was watching from the secret passage behind the library wall, a cold smile on my lips. Their performance was over. Mine was about to begin. If you're watching from Texas or Tokyo, subscribe and let me know, because this is a story about how a mother's love can turn into a weapon, and how the quietest revenge is the one they never see coming. Let me rewind. I should have known. At 72, I thought I understood the world. I'd built a life, a legacy, after my husband Arthur passed 5 years ago, leaving me his pharmaceutical empire. Harrison Pharmaceuticals was my life, our life. My name is Eleanor Harrison, and for decades, that name meant something. And Michael, my son who I'd raised to be a good man, the little boy I'd taught to read using that same copy of Moby Dick now hidden in the library, or so I thought, was my only heir. The trouble started subtly, about 6 months ago. Michael, who was now 42, and his wife, Isabella, a sharply beautiful woman of 38, began visiting more frequently. At first, I was thrilled. The loneliness after Arthur's death was a constant ache, and their presence was a balm. They'd bring takeout from my favorite Italian place, talk about their plans. Isabella would fuss over the garden, saying it needed freshening up. Michael would ask careful questions about the business, about how I was managing the board of directors alone. "You've done so much, Mom," he'd say, his hand covering mine. "Don't you think it's time to enjoy your golden years? Travel, relax, let us handle the stress." The word us always included Isabella. She'd nod enthusiastically. "We could take such good care of everything for you." Michael's been studying the company reports every night. He's so ready. I felt a prickle of unease, but I mistook it for pride. My son, stepping up. I was proud and tired. The truth is, running Harrison Pharma was exhausting. The thought of passing the torch was seductive. Then came the health scare, a minor fainting spell at a charity gala. Isabella made it sound like a heart attack. They insisted I see their new doctor, a Dr. Evans. He was charming, concerned. He talked about the perils of stress at my age, mentioned early signs of cognitive fatigue, and suggested it might be wise to have a family member given power of attorney, just temporarily, for your own protection. The pieces were there, but I refused to put them together. I saw what I wanted to see, a loving son and a devoted daughter. So, when Michael called me one Tuesday morning, his voice thick with what I now recognize as staged emotion, I walked right into their trap. "Mom, we need to have a family meeting," he'd said. "It's about your legacy. We want to make sure everything is preserved, exactly as you and Dad would have wanted." They invited me to the family estate for the weekend, a quiet time to talk, just the three of us. Isabella had cooed over the phone. "We'll have a nice dinner. We can finally go through Dad's old study together." I arrived that Friday evening. The house felt different. My favorite armchairs had been Arthur's antique globe was gone from the foyer. Isabella greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek that felt as cold as marble. "You look tired, Eleanor," she said. "Let's get you settled." Dinner was a tense affair. The conversation kept circling back to the company, the stocks, the trust funds. Michael laid out a plan for me to gracefully transition out of my CEO role, appointing him as my successor. "It's what the board expects, Mom," he said, pouring me a second glass of a rich, heavy Bordeaux. "A clear succession plan. It'll stabilize the stock price." Isabella leaned in. "And for your personal assets, we've drawn up some documents, just to simplify things, to avoid probate." She gestured to a folder on the sideboard. I saw it then, the concrete proof that it was a bank transfer slip, peeking out from under the folder. Later, when they were clearing the plates, I picked it up. It was a wire confirmation from my personal account, which they now controlled through the power of attorney. The amount was staggering. $5 million. The date was 2 days after my fainting spell. The recipient was a shell company name I didn't recognize, Ethel Holdings, but in the memo line, in Isabella's precise handwriting, was a single word, *yacht*. My blood ran cold. The beautiful 50-foot yacht they'd taken me out on the previous month, the one they'd named the Golden Years *, a gift to ourselves for all our hard work. Michael had said, I'd thought they'd taken out a loan, they'd bought it with my money. That's when I noticed Isabella's phone. propped against a vase, its camera lens pointed directly at me. She wasn't just recording, she was building a case, catching me on video after a few glasses of wine, looking frail and confused while they talked about complex financial matters. Everything fell into place with horrifying clarity. The doctor's vague deck, the pushed for power of attorney, the isolation from my old friends on the board. They weren't preparing for my future. They were orchestrating my end. I don't feel well, I stammered, standing up. The room swam a little. The wine, or panic. I think I need to lie down. Michael's face changed. The warm, concerned mask dissolved into something hard and impatient. You're not going anywhere, Mother, he said, his voice flat. We need to sign these papers tonight. Sign what? What papers? Isabella picked up the folder and slid it across the table towards me. It was a document titled Voluntary Resignation and Asset Transfer Agreement. It's for the best. Eleanor, she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. The doctor's reports are very clear. The stress is affecting your memory. Your judgment is compromised. My judgment is fine. I protested, my voice shaking. This is absurd. I'm not signing anything. Asterisk, asterisk, but that wasn't the worst part. Asterisk, asterisk. The worst part was what happened next. Michael sighed, as if I were a stubborn child. Mom, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And what's the hard way? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Isabella picked up her phone, properly now, and started recording. The hard way, she said calmly, is that an elderly woman with a known heart condition, grieving her husband, tragically succumbs to a sudden cardiac arrest in her sleep. It's so common at your age. The doctor will sign the death certificate without a second thought. We'll be heartbroken, of course, but we'll honor your memory by stewarding the company you loved. I stared at my son, the boy I'd read bedtime stories to, whose skinned knees I'd kissed, whose college education I'd paid for without a second thought. He looked back at me, his expression one of cool resolve. You're monsters, I whispered. No, Mother, Michael said, stepping closer. We're realists. Now, sign the papers. Go to hell. That's when Isabella gave a small, dismissive shrug. Have it your way. She walked to the intercom on the wall. Charles, Mrs. Harrison isn't feeling well. She's becoming agitated. Please bring her evening medication to the library. Charles was the new live-in nurse they'd hired. I'd thought it was for my comfort. Now I understood he was their jailer. This was it. They weren't just going to rob me. They were going to drug me into submission or silence. I felt a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. I had to get out. I remembered the secret passage. Arthur had shown it to me when we first bought the house, a Prohibition-era relic behind a moving bookcase in the library, leading to a small panic room and an exit to the gardens. I knew the panic room had no external communication and only a few days of supplies. It was a trap, not a sanctuary. My only chance was the garden exit. I pretended to slump against the table, clutching my chest. My pills, I gasped, forcing my voice into a weak tremble. In my purse, in the library. They exchanged a glance of satisfaction. They thought I was breaking, but Michael took my arm, his grip firm. Let's get you to the library, Mom. They led me into the oak-paneled room. My purse was on the desk. As Michael reached for it, I wrenched my arm free and stumbled toward the bookcase. My fingers found the hidden latch behind a copy of Moby Dick Arthur's Little Joke. I pushed. The bookcase swung inward with a soft groan. What the hell? Isabella exclaimed. I slipped into the darkness just as Charles entered the room. I heard their shouts of confusion and fury as I slammed the hidden door shut, engaging the heavy, old-fashioned bolt from the inside. I was safe, for a moment. I stood in the dusty, narrow passage, my breath coming in ragged sobs. They were pounding on the bookcase, but it was solid oak, designed to conceal. I made a mental note to thank my paranoid, brilliant Arthur later. I didn't go to the panic room. I followed the passage to its end, a disguised door hidden by overgrown ivy on the side of the house. I slipped out into the cool night air. I didn't run. I knew I couldn't sustain a run for long. Instead, I moved as quickly as I could through the shadows of the garden, sticking to the overgrown paths Arthur and I had once walked for pleasure. My heart thundered, every creak of a branch sounding like a footstep behind me. I had to stop more than once, my breath catching in my chest, my legs burning with a strain I hadn't felt in years. It felt like an eternity, my body aching with a fear I hadn't known since I was a child. But it was over an hour before I finally saw the lights of the main road, my progress agonizingly slow. I used the emergency phone I always carried, a lesson from Arthur, to call a number I knew by heart, but hadn't dialed in years. My late husband's most trusted and most discreet security consultant, a man named Frank. Frank found me shivering at a deserted bus stop an hour later. He didn't ask questions. He just bundled me into his car, gave me a blanket, and drove. He took me to a safe house, a small, anonymous apartment owned by one of his contacts. Over the next 10 days, Frank kept me informed. He showed me the news clips on his laptop where Michael and Isabella, their faces the picture of grief, reported me missing to a sympathetic press. Grieving, confused widow wanders off from family estate. We discovered they had already used their corrupt contacts to expedite the process, having a compliant doctor sign a false statement and bribing a probate court clerk to fast-track the paperwork, pressuring a judge to declare me legally dead after a sham investigation. A death certificate was issued. My memorial service was scheduled. The speed of it, fueled by their corruption, was terrifying. I decided to let them have their funeral. The day of the service, I watched from a van parked down the street, a live feed from a camera Frank had planted in the house. I saw the flowers, the mourners, the tearful eulogy my son gave. I saw Isabella, in a black designer dress, dabbing at dry eyes. I saw them accept condolences for their tragic loss. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. Frank assured me he had already taken steps to ensure the recording on Isabella's phone from that night would be useless to them, having cloned its data weeks earlier as a precaution, and now remotely wiping the PIT device. That's when I knew I wouldn't just expose them, I would annihilate them. Frank, using his network, dug deeper. He discovered Isabella had been siphoning money for over a year, working with a corrupt lawyer named Miranda Torres who specialized in estate resolution. They had a system: find a wealthy, aging relative, manufacture evidence of incapacity, secure power of attorney, and liquidate the assets. My case was just one of many. We had the bank records, the falsified medical reports, the incriminating emails between Isabella and Torres. But the final, most horrifying piece of the puzzle came the day after the funeral. Frank intercepted a communication. They weren't just stealing my fortune. They were planning to cement their claim by producing an heir. They had arranged, through a shadowy agency, to adopt a newborn. The plan was to present the baby to the courts as a long-lost grandchild, a direct bloodline heir to solidify their control over the trust funds I had supposedly left them. That baby changed everything. He was an innocent pawn in their disgusting game. It was time for my resurrection. The night after the memorial, I used my old key to get back into my house. The silence was profound. I went straight to Arthur's old study. The desk was littered with their plans, drafts of the new will, financial projections for Harrison Pharma under Michael's leadership, and a file on the baby. His name was to be Arthur James, after my husband. The irony was sickening. I was sitting in my high-backed leather chair, the lights off, waiting. When they returned home, I heard their voices before I saw them. "It's done," Isabella was saying, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Everything is ours. We can finally stop pretending." "I just want to check the security system," Michael replied, his voice weary. They walked into the study and flipped on the light. I watched the color drain from their faces. Isabella let out a small, strangled scream. Michael stumbled back as if he'd been shot. "You," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You're here, dead." I finished for him, standing up slowly. "It appears the reports were greatly exaggerated." "How?" Isabella whispered, her face a mask of terror. "It turns out," I said, my voice steady, "that when you push a mother into a corner, you shouldn't be surprised when she claws her way out." I picked up a digital recorder from the desk and held it up. "I've been enjoying a fascinating conversation you two had over dinner last night. Something about Miranda Torres and Ethel Holdings, and a baby you're planning to use as a prop." Their faces were a beautiful portrait of sheer, unadulterated panic. "It's over," I said. "The police are on their way. So is the second so," I added, looking at Isabella, "is the real mother of that baby you tried to buy. Frank found her by tracing the payments to a numbered offshore account and leveraging an old contact who knew the agency's inner workings. She was a vulnerable young woman who had been misled about the adoption, and she's decided she wants her son back." The sound of sirens grew in the distance. Michael sank to his knees, sobbing, not for me, but for himself. Isabella just stood there, frozen, her beautiful plan crumbling to dust around her. I walked out of my house that night and never looked back. The courts returned control of Harrison Pharma to me. I sold it and used the majority of the proceeds to found a foundation for elder abuse victims, named after my husband. Arthur Jumzai kept the name to honor the child's new beginning was returned to his biological mother. I set up a trust for him, ensuring he'll have every opportunity in life, far away from the greed that almost claimed him. Michael and Isabella are in prison, alongside their lawyer. They tried to plead insanity, coercion, everything but the truth. They were just greedy. I get a letter from Michael sometimes, asking for forgiveness. I don't read them anymore, because I had learned something in the darkness of that secret passage. Family wasn't a title you inherited. It was a choice you made every day to protect, to love, and to stand for what's right. I would often wonder what anyone else would have done in my situation. ****, a mother's silence is her strongest weapon. ****.